When people think about the fall of Rome, they imagine barbarians storming the gates, collapsing legions, or emperors being poisoned in marble palaces. But empires don't collapse only from external attacks. They rot from within, and one of the most destructive forces is always money. Rome didn't fall just because of invasions or corruption. It fell because its currency collapsed. And the lessons from that collapse still apply to every modern economy that thinks it can play games with money and get away with it. Let's set the stage. For centuries, the backbone of Rome's economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 211 BC, it was nearly pure silver. Trusted across the empire and beyond, Roman soldiers were paid with it, merchants demanded it, and ordinary people stored their wealth in it. The denarius wasn't just money, it was confidence in metal form. The power of the empire and the value of its money were linked. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in its currency. But running an empire is expensive. Legions had to be paid, roads and aqueducts had to be built, wars had to be financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was stretched thin, defending its borders against Germanic tribes, the Parthians in the east, and internal unrest. Tax revenues couldn't keep up with military spending, so emperors turned to an ancient trick, debasement. Instead of taxing citizens more, a deeply unpopular choice, they reduced the silver content in the denarius. Under Augustus, the denarius was about 95% pure silver. Under Caracalla, in the early 3rd century AD, it had fallen to 50%. By the time of Gallienus, in the mid-3rd century, the silver content had dropped below 5%. A coin once made of real metal had become a bronze disc with a thin silver wash on top. People could see and feel the difference. Inflation followed, because money was no longer anchored to real value. A measure of wheat that once cost 1 denarius suddenly cost dozens. This wasn't a theory. It destroyed the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher pay to keep up with rising prices. Merchants stopped accepting debased coins, preferring barter or gold. Local economies reverted to direct trade because the currency was no longer trusted. And as confidence evaporated, emperors struck even cheaper coins, hoping volume could replace value. It was a vicious cycle, repeated in countless inflations throughout history. The crisis peaked during the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome endured nearly 50 years of chaos, invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed. Some ruled only months before being killed. Behind the political drama was a broken financial system. Taxes were demanded in coins worth less and less. Farmers abandoned their land to avoid paying. Trade networks shattered, and the government attempted desperate measures, from price controls to forced labor, to keep the system alive. None of it worked. One emperor, Diocletian, tried to stop the bleeding. In 301 AD, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, fixing the cost of thousands of goods and services, from grain to wages. The punishment for violating the law was death. The edict was a disaster. Prices couldn't be controlled by decree when the money itself was worthless. The black market exploded and official trade nearly collapsed. People learned quickly, a law cannot fix a broken coin. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius altogether. Constantine the Great introduced the solidus around 312 AD, a gold coin of consistent purity. It restored some stability and lasted for centuries in the Eastern Roman Empire. But by then, the Western Empire was fatally weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economic core. Armies could no longer be sustained, trade had collapsed, and trust was gone. Rome didn't fall in one moment, and it was a long unraveling, and the collapse of its currency was one of the sharpest threads. So what does this tell us today? This: the destruction of money, the destruction of empires. Rome thought it could trick its people by issuing coins that looked the same but held less real value. Modern states think they can do the same, by printing money, manipulating interest rates, and inflating away debt. But the result is always the same. The people pay the price, wealth disappears, trust collapses. Rome learned this lesson the hard way. If we ignore it, so will we. History didn't stop teaching after Rome. Every major inflationary crisis follows the same pattern. Governments destroy money. Elites protect themselves with real assets. Citizens become poor. Rome's currency crisis was just the first full-scale example. The blueprint for collapse. Let's take a quick look at the 20th century. The echoes are terrifying. Post-World War I Germany. Reparations had to be paid. The government printed marks. Hyperinflation exploded in 1923. Bread, 1 mark, 200 billion marks. Savings vanished. Radical politics rose. Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Money printed. Inflation hit 89.7 sextillion% annually. Price tags couldn't keep up. Currency died. The US dollar took over. The government again thought it could cheat reality. The people again felt the pain. And it's not just extreme examples. Even modern economies follow Rome's model. In 1971, the US detached the dollar from gold completely, a currency based only on trust. Debt exploded, money supply expanded, inflation quietly stole wealth. $1 in 1971 worth less than 1 or 6 of that today. Bills look the same. Coins look the same. But the value is gone. The trick is always the same, treating inflation as growth. The difference today? The next crisis will be global. Now the entire world is built on paper money, massive debt, central bank bailouts. The next collapse won't hit one country or one empire. It will hit the entire system. And history tells us who gets crushed. Those who rely on salaries, those whose savings are in paper, those without real assets. So what should individuals do? Inflation is not a mistake, it is policy. A silent tax. Real wealth, land, skills, productive businesses, resources. Never assume stability is permanent. Tell a Roman in the 1st century, this money will be worthless one day. They'd laugh. Tell a German in 1913, they'd laugh. Tell a Zimbabwean in the 1980s, same story, but they all collapsed. Rome's currency crisis reminds us, when money stops being real, society collapses, contracts break, trade dies, armies dissolve, governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gate only finish the job. The real killer sits inside the treasury. History doesn't repeat. But if you don't understand it, it will crush you. Rome's currency crisis showed how fragile money becomes when abused by power. That fragility is still with us. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. In today's world, money is dying, but those who recognize the collapse first are the ones who read history correctly. That's why here on this channel, we will continue to expose the dark stories of money, the invisible empires, the forces that control wealth, and the economic games that shape the future. Real wealth is knowledge, and those who hold knowledge rise rather than fall in a collapse. So don't disappear, keep watching, because this journey has only just begun. History holds the answers and I'll show you where to look.